So welcome to our webinar. This is a first or an introduction to a series of webinars where we're going to cover some of the pitfalls that organizations face when they're creating customer surveys. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to do one webinar where we cover 100 specific examples. So what we're going to do is just cover an introduction today, and we're only going to touch on really 4 examples in today's intro. But the remaining part of the series, we're definitely going to dig deep into a lot of those common pitfalls that people encounter. So the web series goal, not just this intro, is all about really enlightenment. We want to pull back the curtain, peel back the layers of the onion a little bit when we talk about customer surveys. Because the truth is, a lot of people who are working on surveys themselves could be do it themselves type people in terms of pulling the surveys together, and there's just some things they may not have really given a lot of thought to when they're developing these things. We want people to understand what those potential pitfalls are, but more importantly, what those implications could be when you start falling into some of those traps sometimes. But the most important part of this entire web series is to help businesses understand that there is a better way moving forward when it comes to developing customer surveys. So some housekeeping first. What and who is CraniumTap? We're a marketing research firm, and for us, we play in this space of wanting to cover 2 things. One is understanding marketing. The best marketers understand and utilize research to its fullest capabilities. And then vice versa, when you talk about research firms and research organizations, the best research firms understand marketing principles and intertwine that into the development of research solutions. CraniumTap likes to strike the balance between the 2 and demonstrate our marketing acumen and also understanding all the statistical relevance and the methodologies that apply the most effective means of getting the information you need in marketing. We're also a little bit more grounded as marketing research firms go. For us, it's about being efficient with our clients' time, and it's getting the most out of what we can give for customers. And as you're going to see throughout this entire series, we're not like the traditional marketing research firms. Myself, my name's Adam Cook. It's real quickly, not to spend a lot of time. I've been in the marketing research industry for roughly 20 years to this point. I've been lucky enough to earn some international and national recognition for work in marketing research. I've also been lucky enough to get 4 separate specific marketing research methodologies published in a peer review, leading marketing research publication, some citations. I've also got a certification as a professional researcher through the Insights Association. Let's get to it. As we talk right now, as we release this webinar, we know it's probably the understatement of the century to say things are really difficult. And businesses are trying to find their way in the short term in terms of solutions, and they're preparing for what they should be doing as we start to create a new business model coming out of the current pandemic situation that we're in. As we're seeing this, I know myself and colleagues, we're seeing a lot of businesses reaching out to customers to get feedback. It's an obvious indication that people recognize the value of getting that feedback to develop more effective business solutions and marketing solutions. But we're also noticing that a lot of these snap decisions, that some of these pitfalls that we're going to touch on in this series, these organizations are falling into them a lot. And part of that product, I think, is because of the climate that we're in right now. This is that point in at least the introductory webinar, but this is sort of for the whole series where we want to say sort of the red pill or the blue pill, and to paraphrase the movie The Matrix, this is your last chance. After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill, the webinar ends, you wake up in your remote home office and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in survey wonderland. And I show you how deep that rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. So this is that point. If you're stuck around, you've obviously chosen the red pill. And again, this is an intro to the entire series. We're going to use a number of examples. Maybe only be 4 here, but the remaining series, we're going to cover at least 96 additional examples. A lot of those examples came from real surveys. We're going to disguise the identities of the businesses and the consultants that may have pulled those questions together to protect the innocent, but do want to let you know that most of these examples are legitimate questions that we see in the survey world and out in the business world. We've all heard this adage, whether it was from a school teacher or even in HR meetings and group meetings and things like that, that there's no such thing as a stupid question. And we're gonna touch on one first introductory example here for our survey question. It's, are there any specific changes that have taken place in Fairview County in the last 20 years that you have not liked? And it was an open-ended response was requested. This is clearly testing the limits of that theory about questions is no such thing as stupid questions. Admittedly, the development of this, again, someone may not know and recognize. That's what we're going to point out here is just like, what are the problems that we see with a question like this? It's one, it lacks a specific context. And when I say that, it's the question's open-ended and says, give any specific changes that have taken place. That's very wide on top of the number of years that they're asking for as well. So, I mean, you could literally get responses from, I didn't like the color that you painted the fire hydrant at the corner of our yard, all the way up to, I don't like the major changes you made in an intersection or the expansion of a highway. It's just, it's so broad, it lacks some initial framing. And speaking of the time frame as well, we also have to be aware that humans, in terms of recollection, it's really difficult for people to think 20 years. Obviously, 10 years is still a bit much. Even 5 years is a lot. It's, typically you don't want to go past 2 years in terms of getting people as far as what they can recall. And then when you start talking about timeframes as well, you have to consider who you're talking to with the respondent base. In this instance, this is Fairview County. They're talking to their residents and requesting feedback. You got to remember, residents have the full range. You could have a 25-year-old homeowner who just bought in the last 6 months and lives in Fairview County, all the way up to someone who's 70 years old and has been living in the county in their current residence for the last 45 years. So you have to ask yourself, how would a 25-year-old answer a question like this? It doesn't really set things up very good in terms of good context in terms of that time frame. Open-ended questions present other challenges as well, and in this instance, you're not going to get yourself a lot of quantifiable insights. Meaning, I can produce a chart that shows me which answers got the highest percentage. It's very subjective and open-ended, what is being asked here, which is going to be a lot of work to paw through on the analytical side. Then the last question you have to ask yourself about an example like this too is, how do you think this might make Fairview County look? Especially if this is going out to residents, I'm a taxpayer, and I get a survey, and then all of a sudden I get presented with a question like this. Doesn't necessarily present Fairview County in the greatest light in terms of how my tax dollars are being spent. So what's important here? Is there an alternative? Yes, there is. And in this instance, the question was so broad, we could go probably 30 different ways. This is our example that we put together as far as, how disruptive did you find the following Fairview County improvement projects completed in the last 2 years? And then we present specific examples of projects that could have occurred within that county, and then have them rate on a scale of, level of disruption it may have caused, not disruptive at all versus extremely disruptive. But then at the end of the question, you still follow up with other Fairview County improvement projects not listed that you found extremely disruptive over the last 2 years. What's great with this alternative, obviously now we're providing specific context. We've identified, improvement projects specifically, and they can see the ones that we want feedback on. It obviously has tightened the time frame a little bit. And I mean, I would even suggest doing it within the last year and be even more reasonable. And then this is obviously going to offer quantitative insights on the back end. Lastly, it also enables us to afford that open-ended opportunity beyond what the measures were in this instance. That's an intro in terms of what we're going to go through a number of questions. I do want to head into, as we start covering more questions, just to reiterate, that I've had a lot of experience in research. I've seen a lot of these pitfalls. You may start to see things that either you have worked on, your marketing department, or other business units that you work closely with. It's not your fault. These are common pitfalls that we see from organizations. The same can be said for even marketing departments. Again, research is another depth and an acumen that has very specific skill sets, and they just may not have given it a lot of thought. And then lastly, you may have even hired a consulting or research firm that could be falling into some of these pitfalls. Again, it's not your fault. If you don't know what you don't know, and that could be the case here, it's just now we want to start arming you with the intelligence to recognize what those potential pitfalls are. Whether you're doing it yourself, a department's doing it for you, or you've hired a research firm to do it for you as well. So this entire premise of the webinar series is designed with understanding what the 3 keys to a successful customer survey looks like. At the top of that, the most paramount thing is developing and creating a positive user experience. Without a positive user experience, you're not going to get the best results, and it's not going to have a positive impact on your brand. You also have to be considerate of making sure you're able to obtain actionable insights from the survey. And you already heard me, that works hand in hand with the user experience. Positive user experience produces better and actionable insights. And lastly, sort of the end game in all this is creating a positive brand experience. But the very nature of a customer survey is an interaction with customers. It's another brand experience. They all work together. And in the end, if you have actionable insights, it will obviously have a positive impact on your brand. If you're creating a good user experience, same thing, but they all work together. And there's a number of things, contributing factors, that create for all 3 of these key components in a successful customer survey. That's the language that you use in the invitations and in general, tied around the customer survey. How the survey in totality is designed, the actual specific language tied to the questions themselves, the question types that you choose, and the designs that you use and incorporate with those question types. And then lastly, the different analytical approaches you can use on the back end, or the most actionable insights. All these are contributing factors to a successful survey. And these are themes that we are specifically going to touch on throughout the remainder of the series. There should be about 4 or 5 follow-up drops to this webinar series that we have that will touch on these themes that are described here. So let's start diving into it. We have 100 things, and we're going to just touch on 3. The first one is tied to everything. It's the most important tip we believe is an important part of incorporating into surveys. That is, utilize digital surveys if you can. If you can, make sure it's mobilely responsive as well. But the digital space for surveys is optimal for creative latitude, what you can do in the questioning techniques you can use, and how you present things. It also enhances the respondent experience and honestly saves time. There's a lot of efficiencies there. The traditional phone and mail survey approaches, they have way more constraints in terms of creative latitude, in terms of what you can, how you design and how you present things, if you can present things at all. And they can be pretty timely and costly as well. But that's just our first tip. In general, it's not tied to any examples, but we put that on the top of our list always. Now, for the next things we're going to cover for examples, we're going to hit on those 3 key factors and speak specifically to those things. The first one, in terms of user experience, a tip here that we have tied to this is displaying a progress bar at the top of the survey. Let's show you an example here. This one is just an example. We're talking about rank order of importance of different things you would consider when buying pizza from a restaurant, essentially. And the respondent has to drag from a list at the bottom and rank them into the top of the list, and they scroll through. And then at the bottom here, you can see there is actually a progress bar in this example. So then you're going to ask yourself, what's the problem? Well, one, this does have a progress bar, but I can tell you if you don't have a progress bar at all, it's going to give the perception of a sense of catfishing for a user or a respondent. When I say that, that means if you have an invitation that says, this survey will take 5 minutes to complete, And then all of a sudden I'm into a survey and I'm answering a number of questions and I'm hitting next, 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 and I keep going page to page and there's no progress bar. I start to get worried. How deep into this am I? Is it really 5 minutes? And then you can see that that type of response can dampen the respondent experience and then can have a negative impact on the brand, and we don't want that. And I also have to say, placing a progress bar at the bottom is probably akin to if someone were going to give a current, weather forecast an hour from now. Doesn't mean much after I've scrolled through an entire page of, it could be, a really long question, or it could have 2 or 3 questions on it. That's my progress to the point where I was when I first got to the page. So what's a solution? The obvious solution, we said at the beginning, the tip, you want to put the progress bar at the top of every page that you have in the survey. I can tell you this now, just having a progress bar, period, research has found that having progress bars helps increase completion rates. They basically act as this barometer and almost like a goal line for respondents. It helps them to understand how realistic of time they've got left in the survey as well. Does it seem reasonable that it's going to hit that initial mark that was established out of an invitation of like 5 minutes or something like that? That helps with the experience. Having it at the top it's a fixed position area as well. You heard me talking about at the bottom of the page. The bottom of the page can vary. Some pages are short, just a simple question. Some have 2 or 3 questions on it. Whenever you have it at the top, it's the first thing you see. It's a fixed position. It will be in the same spot every time. So switching gears to actionable insights. One tip that we have tied here is talking about using modern visual sliding anchor scales versus a traditional 1 to 5 point Likert scale. So let's take a look at an example. We're going to use the same pizza example. It's just rewritten to fit into a Likert scale. In this example, you can see 1 to 5, not at all important, all the way up to extremely important. And then you're able to do the classic radial points, click where you want this on the scale in this example. I'm sure you're all asking what could possibly be the problem with this question. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that tie to user experience and brand, all those components. But when we start talking about actionable insights, a lot of these user experiences can have a negative impact on the results. And when I say that, you look at a Likert scale, it may have radial points. In this instance, on this example one, it can produce like a battleship or a bingo card effect where people sort of doing a hunt and peck and find where they are on that question. And that adds time to a survey. It also presents the challenge of not capturing the subtleties in what consumers may see as differences in all these metrics that may be listed on a Likert scale question like this. And when I say that, you can see there's only 1 to 5 points on that scale. That's, I have to pick between a 4 and a 5. That's a pretty big leap when, the midpoint is only 2 points away from the extreme, from either end. So what's the solution? This is an example that we use and integrate the visual sliding anchor scale. You can see people can subtly move it across the board. In this instance, we use a 0 to 100 scale. You can see the numbers listed in the example. What are the advantages in this in terms of this solution? It helps to eliminate the overwhelming nature of that radial point thing that we were talking about, the hunting and pecking component. It also empowers the respondent to rate things based on visual cues. So they're not as obsessed over, do I give it a 3 or a 4 or 4 or 5? It's really just that visceral, I'm going to drag this bar along until I feel like that's where it falls on my scale. So it helps relieve that stress that sort of a bingo card effect can present. And then this captures all those nuances at a very unique and individual level for a respondent, which is very helpful in the overall analysis when you get hundreds, if not thousands of respondents to a survey. It helps to eliminate those unnatural ties as well. And you can see it on this slide here. These are the 2 examples of the Likert scale and the visual sliding anchor scale. And you can see in the top, there was an instance where an individual could feel like they had the rate, the ability to order online, different cheese options and speedy delivery, they all ended up getting a 5. But the reality is they may not have necessarily felt that, but that 5-point scale sort of forced people to do that. Whereas a visual sliding anchor scale has much greater nuance because you're able to put in, basically in this example, a 0 to 100 scale. This is basically the difference between operating in what we would call sort of that 8-bit Mario world versus 128-bit Mario world. It's a little bit more clunky in that 1 to 5 world, but it's definitely more like an HD environment when you use a sliding visual anchor scale. Some people are probably going to ask, but we've been using 1 to 5 scales forever. Is it an easy transition to move to that? Well, one, you have to have the platform that has this type of scale option available, obviously. But I can tell you this, and we'll probably have a separate article or drop in a webinar, that you can convert the scales mathematically when you transition from one to the other. It's not as difficult as you may believe. And we'll speak to that in another series or article. The last example I'm going to touch on is tied to brand impact. And the tip here out of that list of 100, it's be aware of the questions that should have that choose not option, choose not to answer option, excuse me. Some topics are just too sensitive, whether it's financial, sexual identity, or religion, and there's a long list of some pretty sensitive topics out there. You want to make sure that respondents have the ability to opt out. So here's an example. This was actually used in a survey from a children's clothing retailer online in one of their surveys to someone who had bought or purchased items online. And you might be asking yourselves, well, what could possibly be wrong with this question? Well, believe it or not, that's a pretty sensitive question to be asking someone. And this is one of those moments you have to say, again, I hadn't really thought about it before, but it's like, step back. Is this something you're willing to just walk up to anyone on the street and just ask customers? It's just like, are you expecting a baby? And then you're expecting an answer of yes or no. And it's just, that's pretty sensitive. And there's a lot of things that can be going on in the back of households that you just don't want to walk into that trap. The obvious solution in this case is to widen and to offer that choice of, choose not to answer. We took the opportunity to sort of rewrite the question a little bit and give it a little bit more framing. Are you expecting a baby or babies within the next 9 months? Yes, Dad, I'm not sure. Choose not to answer. So those are just 3 examples, single tip that are tied specifically to the user experience, actionable insights, and positive brand impact experience. It's, as you can see, even when I talk through each of them, they all work hand in hand. When all of them are working together, you're going to create the most successful customer survey experience possible. And it has a positive impact across the board. With your customers, with the insights, and with your business. So that leads us into what should you expect from the remaining series. You already heard me touch on it before. We're going to hit on these 5 specific themes moving forward. We may couple 2 or 3 of these themes together in one drop, but we are going to cover those 100 examples. We'll walk through the problems just like we did on these few examples today, but most importantly, show you some examples of solutions to overcoming some of those pitfalls, excuse me. And then we're also going to cover some other marketing research topics as well. You heard me touch on question types with Likert scale. We have a much deeper dive into customers or consumer sentiment. That's just a nice fancy word for how people feel about things, what their perceptions are on stuff, their levels of consideration, levels of interest, things that rate along a scale. What are the most effective question types and how those impact your results? We're going to do a drop on that probably within the next 3 weeks. And then we're going to touch on things like customer segmentation and persona development for organizations, some best practices tied to those. We'll dabble a little bit in the geographic analysis world. We'll touch on some potential pitfalls in the focus group area. There's also different gap techniques available in the research world, and we want to give exposure to what some of those look like. Same idea, are there some pitfalls with some, or are there some more effective gap techniques out there as well? There's also something else we see in the marketing world a lot, and that's a quadrant analysis. It's measuring two different types of metrics against each other and placing attributes in different quadrants that we're going to touch on, and that there's more effective ways to analyze that type of data. We'll also talk about more effective communication testing techniques, how to optimally measure what the potential or actual impact looks like in a market. And then we're going to continue to drop additional types of webinars tied to marketing research and analysis moving forward as well. After you start going through these series and you start to see a lot more examples, obviously we have 96 specific examples moving forward on all these things. What's going to be interesting is start looking at surveys. That moment I talked about earlier in terms of just hadn't really given it a lot of thought before. You'll want to take a look and start giving it a thought. It's like, could that have an impact on the user experience? Does that have an impact on the analysis? And then lastly, how does that make the brand look? You're going to see it's pretty prevailing in terms of a lot of these pitfalls that people fall into. But again, this series is intended to enlighten and to make sure people are walking around with their eyes open and understand there are better ways so that they can have a positive impact on their brand. And as we move forward through this series, if you have any questions or you need any help, you can either contact us directly through our website, or you can contact us directly through the email address we have listed here, or if you have a representative from our parent organizations already, feel free to contact us directly through those representatives. Thank you for your time today on this introductory webinar. I look forward to dropping the remaining series moving forward in surveys as well as other marketing research techniques. Thank you.